with the advent of Pierre Boulez becoming the principal conductor of the BBC Symphony Orchestra, this presented you with William Glock with a number of commissions, particularly for the proms.
That plus the series at the Roundhouse, which Boulez initiated, wanted to take the music into an alternative space, which was not frightening to the public, and feeling that they had to be all dressed up. It was very casual, and did some marvelous concerts in that series. And yes, that I mean that was very fortunate for me, because Boulez knew my work from Europe. I'd already conducted in Paris and other places, and so I became, in a sense, almost his natural choice, along with a couple of other of my generation, whose music he thought was sufficiently new to interest him and for him to project it. And so there was a series of about four concert commissions that were either played at the proms or at the Roundhouse. Also, when the orchestra went on tour in Europe, they took me along, and that was also a great help. I should say also that both Boulez and Berio were responsible for my being taken up by Universal Edition, Universal Edition in Vienna. They took my music there and said, "You have to publish this, young man." And now we're talking about publishers like Alfred Schley and Alfred Kalmus, people who knew Mahler, they knew Bartok, they knew Schoenberg, Berger, I mean, people whose whole life was music, and new music as well. I mean, they were not frightened of it; they encouraged it. So that was a great help. And so Boulez knew me from there, and yeah, I was happy to.
Were there any standout moments in any of those commissions that you can remember?
The one thing about the BBC and its commissioning is it's a fairly open book. When they say, "We want a new work from you, is there anything pressing that that you would like to do?" So I think in all cases it was something I said, yes, I'd like to do this or that and the other. One piece which anecdotally is kind of interesting was Mes Alliances for piano and orchestra. And as the title implies, it's a misfit. And I was interested in the relationship between a soloist, a piano, which is not replicated in the orchestra, and maybe 25 or 26 orchestral instruments. And the piece begins with all 26 members of the orchestra playing cadenzas simultaneously. I mean, it's one huge, massive blast of sound, texture. And gradually it's filtered to the point where the piano comes in with only a single note, and so on. It's like cutting a piece of paper from angle to angle, and then, like on a fault in a fault line, and slipping it so that its relationships are put down the line. But then the piece ends in a massive cadenza for the piano, because the orchestra has gone down to nothing. So Pierre Boulez has to stand there for the last 6 minutes with nothing to do. And he took it in such good. It was, but it was the performer was Australian pianist who, the morning of the dress rehearsal, had been shaving. Apparently the razor slipped out of his hand and he cut his finger. So by the time we'd finished the dress rehearsal, the keyboard was bright red. And Boulez always used to remind me, he said, "Oh, that bloody occasion." So that stands out for the wrong reasons, probably, but it was funny. But yeah, Roger Woodward was the name of the pianist.
Right.
He'd been a frenetic individual who I remember once at the Queen Elizabeth Hall. He was giving a recital, solo recital of new music. And when he'd finished, there was a standing ovation. And then as an encore, he sat down to play the huge Beethoven sonatas, an encore. People wanted to go to their trains and get home. Yeah, the what's it called? The clavier, the big silent senior moment. Anyway, so that was the kind of guy that he was.
So, following all of these wonderful opportunities and commissions from the BBC, you then came to America shortly after.
Yeah, there were other commissions that came along through Cheltenham and various other festivals in Britain. I'm working with other kind of, like John Pritchard conducted my work in Cheltenham, and yeah, and then there were various other BBC orchestras, which either did them or I conducted them. Yeah. And actually, I had come to the United States in '66 for 2 years on a Harkness Fellowship, International Fellowship, along with Harrison Birtwistle. We were on the same fellowship, and we both went to Princeton, and so we spent a whole year together in Princeton. After that, we had a second year. I went to the University based in Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, which was a kind of mecca of new music in the States at that time, and Harry went to Boulder, Colorado. But during that year, Harry and I had a wonderful relationship. Our kids went to school together and all of that. And we did a lot of cooking together because Harry loves to eat and cook, and so do I. That was nice. Yeah, and then I one of the obligations of that fellowship that you had to return to the country of origin. This was to sort of stop the brain drain, so to speak. I don't know about between Harry and me carrying much brains out of England, but so I'd already experienced a lot of, Tanglewood and Aspen and various aspects of American musical life. But I went back, obligated, and taught at York for 5 years. And that was a lovely time for me with very fine students. Wilfred Mellors had relatively recently formed that music department with a very different set of ideas about teaching music, which appealed to me, and so and between that and I was also a fellow at Brasenose College, Oxford, at the same time, so I would shuttle back and forth a bit. But yeah, that was a nice time. And then I came to the States. I was invited just for a year to go to the University of California in San Diego. And in the February of that year, they said, "Would you like to stay?" And at that time in my life, I had no good reason for going back to England. So I stayed. And yeah, I've been here ever since.
So what was the attractiveness in staying in America? Was it the opportunities? Was it the culture? The climate?
I think it was, it's a generalization, but there's a certain kind of freedom that you can, it was partly that, and partly that I didn't want to belong to the various small territories in Europe, whether it was Stockhausen's territory or even Berrios' territory, whom I loved and worshipped. And I didn't want to belong to Ligetis' camp or Boulez's camp. I wanted to make my music my way. And it may sound sort of simple in a way, but it's very real, and it's today. I mean, if you're in Germany today, I think, and you're not either Riem or
Riem, I can't think. It's not
Wolfgang Riem and Helmut Lachermann.
Oh, Lachman, right.
Yeah, I didn't. You know, it's that for me is such a confinement, and in the same way that I think that my music has always had a connection to popular music in the best sense, that there's something about melody and harmony that I want to hear. You know, I hear it and feel it and articulate it in my own particular way. So that was mainly the reason. Then the opportunity when I was in Southern California was to start an ensemble with very fine players, and one of the advantages of that in the university context in the States is that you can rehearse a lot more than you do when you in the professional grind, you know. And so I said, okay, if they asked me if I'd like to form an ensemble, I said yes, I'd be keen on that, but we're going to work hard. I'm not going on any stage until we absolutely nailed what it is we're doing, and they're going to be tough programs, but we're going to work on them until we would make the composer proud of what they've created. And they bought into it, and it was a lot of hard work and a lot of time consuming, but it was also, as Boulez himself has said about his experience of learning to conduct, it influenced his music immensely, and particularly when he started to do more and more repertoire, Second Viennese School and so on, and Bartok, and yeah, so that was very enjoyable. And then I left and came to the East Coast. And
so that's an interesting path, because of course Pierre Boulez formed the ensemble Intercontemporain, and Peter Maxwell Davies created the Fires of London, and you created Sonor in California.
Yeah. Well, we'd had the Sonor in England for a couple of years. Josephine Nendick was the singer. Paul Crossley was the pianist. The bass player Barry Guy was a very, very dear friend of mine, and there's a story right there. But and Peter, flute player of the LSO, Peter Fletcher, yeah, Peter Fletcher, and so I got these 7 or 8 players together, and I wanted some of the flexibility of the jazz people to interact with the rather more, you know, traditional ways of the, and it worked very well. But Harry and Max, they started their ensemble, which then became the Pierrot players when the Fires of London, and I got this invitation to come to California. I said, I'll go for a little while. Here I am.
And once you'd left the UK shores and come to America, did a lot of the commissions from the UK start to dry up?
Oh, dry up. Oh, yeah.
So that you were now...
not only commissions, but performances.
Really?
Yeah. You know, mentioning our dear friend Sally Grove, I had not seen her for years, but a few years ago, we were at Tanglewood, and this beautiful woman came running to me, Bernard! And so it was Sally, sweet as ever, and so on. I mean, we were all in love with Sally when she was 18 or 19. You know. And we were just talking, and I said, you know, she said, well, why don't you come back? And I said, you mean? But she said, no, for performances and things. I said, well, there aren't any. Can you explain why? She said, well, you buggered off when you... that was precisely what she said. When you were at the prime of, you know, everybody knew Bernard Rands in England at that time. But, well, you know, it happens, so, yeah.
So the physical presence of not being in a country actually affected...
It did, yes. It did, definitely. Yeah. And now things are starting to happen, and I mean, it wasn't completely severed. I mean, there's always, you know, there's enough recordings for them to use if they want to. But yeah, I think it's. I wouldn't say anybody took umbrage that I'd left, but and there were some people who thought, "Thank God he's going to."
So you became yet another émigré composer from Europe.
Yeah, an immigrant.
That came to America.
Yeah.
First of all, working at the universities, but then, of course, you became composer in residence with the Philadelphia Orchestra, and have worked with Chicago and all of the major orchestras.
All of them now,
in America.
Pretty much, yeah.
So, working with Riccardo Muti, first of all, in Philadelphia, resulted in what works?
He commissioned 3, and then a work called Madrigal, which is based on the 8th book of Madrigals of Monteverdi. There, I should remember, a piece that for the 100th anniversary of Carnegie Hall, and another couple of large orchestra pieces. But you see, I'd known him at least tangentially from a long time before, when I lived in Firenze. I remember him coming there to be the music director of Maggio Musicale. This young man, but you could tell then, if you had any sense of what music making is about, this is the deal. But then I got the call because of the program that was putting composers with orchestras in the States. Would I like to go to Philadelphia and talk to Riccardo Muti about it? So I did. That was good. We did several international tours and a couple of national tours, and he was very good. I mean, he made me feel that I was part of the orchestra.
But it was one of the first composers.
No, it's one of the last ones, actually, under that particular auspice, the auspices of Meet the Composer. Started with Jacob Druckmann with the New York Philharmonic, and then it went round various ones, and I wasn't even thinking particularly well. That's what I said. Because in San Diego, with David Atherton, I did a lot of work with them, and helped, I think, influence David to make some choices about new music and so on. And I conducted several pieces. But no, it was a good relationship. Enjoyed it very, very much. So, and then when he came here, Riccardo Muti, he first thing he did was call me and say, "I want a new piece for my first week." So.
And of course, that story is famous because that first week didn't happen.
No, it felt which was to my advantage. I mean, sorry it was so sad for him, but he then it became at the end of the season when they were going on tour, so he put it in the program and played it in 6 the major cities in Europe. So it was. I think that was the beginning of people in England realizing that, well, maybe Bernard Rands is worth a visit again.
So, living in America for it's over 30 years now.
It's 48, 45 years, yeah.
45 years.
Yeah.
How do you think that this has affected your compositions?
It's always a difficult question. I mean, it's a perfectly reasonable question, and one assumes that in one way or another that one's environment influences. I can't say that the way I shape things harmonically or melody of any influence that I could actually say this is due to the fact that I lived in California or in Massachusetts but I think that for myself I got rid of the avant-garde obligation that hangs over European young composers in Europe. So that, you know, I've worked my way through it from early 12-tone pieces through aleatory pieces, getting freedom, and being drawn more and more and more to the music of Debussy and Ravel as my lineage, and Mahler, but mixed in with a lot of other things. So I think in that sense, for me personally, it was a freedom from that I'm going to write what I want to write. I am under no obligation to anybody to either feel stylistically drawn to them or not, and so on. I have enough knowledge of the wide spectrum of music from early years to contemporary. But I do think it's important to feel that one is part of a lineage, because I think so many young composers now sort of are floating in the ether. They don't know where they belong, but they think they should belong there. I got rid of all of that. And Canti del Sole is very specifically an attempt on my part to simplify my musical language, basically. Because, you know, one of the problems of a lot of new music, some of it very wonderful new music, is the complexity. So when we talk about harmonic rhythm in Beethoven, we're talking about a sweep, you know, and then later in Debussy, so on. So and a lot of new music, not only is it changing 5 times in a measure, it's changing in a quintuplet, so that every part of that quintuplet is actually another harmonic implication, to the point where, you know, most people can't cope with it. There's no way. I mean, I've got very good ears, and so did Mr. Boulez, and no. But it's so I decided I'm going to, as much as I can with this project of all these texts and these wonderful images, to have it focus on a path through, which I think any willing listener sitting down to listen can hear it. And then, having simplified that, my task has been ever since to reintroduce things that I probably had pushed to the side for that purpose in that piece. And so for me, it's a seminal piece in my own life rather than in a larger context.
So the literal translation of Canti du Soleil is songs of the sun.
Of the sun, yeah.
So but the overriding theme of the song cycle is about lightness, darkness.
Yeah.
It's a voyage of man.
Yep.
What lay behind this inspiration?
Well, remember that it's part of the trilogy, so that Canti Lunatici, and that's like lunatic songs. But I mean, I am a moon person. I don't have to look at my diary to know when there's a full moon. I mean, I feel it. I know it's. You ask Augusta, she'll tell you. Oh.
It's the werewolf.
Yeah. So those are songs of the moon, and there are 7 in the first part, which is the waxing of the moon. There's a central one, which is a big moon party, and then there's the waning, 7 poems that deal with the waning. Similarly, with Canti del Sole, there are the first part is from very early morning, from dawn, before the sun actually comes up, and then just gradually, and then it becomes light, and then it becomes sunny. And then, now in November, the D.H. Lawrence poem, nearer comes the sun, because it's now moved in the heavens. So I chose my texts in that way, which have a kind of an unfolding, not an operatic unfolding, but at least there's a narrative in that. And then the last part, Canti dell'Eclissi, are all poems about the eclipse, and very dark, from Milton, and was blind, and so for him, yeah.
And you've stayed with the original language, so the music that exists within the poetry you've captured wonderfully. Had you translated some of those, of course?
No, you're absolutely right, William. Thank you. And I mean, the assonance of the texts influences the timbre of the orchestra, so that when it changes to French, you hear the instruments are chosen specifically to have that kind of a sound. I mean, that's just one instance, but that's going on all the time. And the other thing is, sorry, excuse me. In all three of the canti, I use a cycling technique where, okay, the texts are set, but what the musical idea or the harmony that occurs with German here might occur with Italian over here. So there's a recall, but it's not, it's transformed. And that's happening all the time in all of the, and I've done a number of concerts where I did all three canti as a program. I mean, it's an hour and a half total. I'd love to do them all. Orchestra at some point, doubt it's going to happen, but because they are so interrelated, it's one long journey. Yeah.
Your conducting of the orchestra, and I passionately believe that it's very important that composers conduct, because for orchestral musicians to experience working with the composer is invaluable.
Yeah.
It's something that you carry with you for the rest of life, and then pass on to future generations through the performances of those works. Talk to us about your experiences as a conductor, both the good and the bad.
Well, yes, they're mostly good, in the sense that I mean, I worked with small ensembles, and obviously sometimes within a university context, or even outside, freelance musicians, and you know, I tried to convey always that, look, I'm not up here as a maestro to teach you how to play your instrument. I'm as a composer, I'm here to gather your expertise to my creative ends. So I think that sets up a different relationship, rather than, you know, I mean, this part of it is straightforward. If you can't beat time, we'll sit down. I mean, and generally speaking, it worked. I mean, there's always an awkward bugger here or there, and you know, I'll play a few wrong notes for you. And if you don't spot them, you know, it sets a seed of doubt. But I've got good ears, and I usually find a way to say, by the way, there must be a mistake in your part, because twice now you've.
But there's a certain aura that a composer brings to a piece that a music director, maestro, whatever you want to call them,
might not, but
can't bring, because you are the creator. You are the lifeblood of our art form.
Yeah. The great example of that was Stravinsky. I mean, he wasn't the world's best conductor by any means, but my God, you know, he knew what he wanted, and in his own way, he got it most of the time. Yeah, and what that must have been like for players playing under his direction, you know, and it goes for a lot of composer conductors. That I mean, again, Boulez. I mean, I don't know a single musician who's played under Boulez who's anything but the best to say. That was a wonderful experience, and all the conductors that I've admired, I get the impression that if anybody ever made a mistake, it would be their fault, because the clarity is. I mean, in the early years, you know, the late 1950s, 1960s, a lot of that music was so complex, metrically and rhythmically and so on. So this becomes a rather angular not very musical way, but watching Boulez particularly over the years, how he rounded that out into an expressivity, and yet the ictus is still there. You can't miss it. No. Another one that had that was Seiji Ozawa. Beautiful, you know, but very, you don't miss, you know exactly where he is and where you are. Yeah. So I never had any great ambition for the, but Boulez and Bandera encouraged me to do more. I just don't have the temperament. Oh, sorry, I just don't have the temperament. I'm fine when I'm in the podium, but when I'm waiting for the door to be opened, I could throw up right there. Boom. I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm not frightened of it, but that bit between there and there, it's just.
You're not alone, because there are many.
Oh no, and good people. Yeah, fantastic. Yes.
That do actually.
Yeah. Yeah, but
for performances.
You know, I would look forward to it, and rehearsing was pleasure, and then 2 minutes to 8.
But I remember when I was doing the Tippett Festival for Michael for his 80th birthday. He performed the Fantasia on a theme of Corelli, and nobody could have done it like him.
Oh.
There was no conductor that could have brought out what he brought out of the orchestra on that occasion.
Yeah.
And I was completely mesmerized.
Yeah.
And I think that probably goes for all of you. That there is such a connection with your own music that it's really quite magical.
Yeah, I think.
And
well,
the British are good at it.
Yeah, remember. Oh, well, Michael used to conduct Purcell's music in a way that was absolutely magical. You know.
But going back to Elgar, I mean, Elgar was probably one of the first conductors.
Yes.
But since then, of course, Britain has conducted, you've conducted, Tippett has conducted. So it seems to be a tradition, and it's being carried on by George Benjamin and Thomas Addies now, but less so by American composers.
No, because over here they study conducting. It's like if you want to be a conductor, study music. Conducting. What does that mean? You know, get your head and your heart and everything into this piece of music, not your own repertoire. If you're conducting Schubert 5, for example, I mean, do it to the point where you would want Schubert to be happy sitting next to you, thinking, "Well, that's pretty good."
Yeah. Well, we're all at the service of the art form.
Sure, absolutely.
All at the service of the music. That's all that's important.
Yeah.
But I loved watching composers rehearsing and performing their own music with ensembles of all types. Yeah. And I think that it should just be encouraged much more, because
it should.
There is that directness between the performer and the creator that we mere conductors sometimes get in the way of.
Oh no, mere conductors. But no, I mean I admired Ollie Nusson for this regard. I mean he's very good at communicating and conducting his own music, and Addies similarly is very well equipped. I mean, to do any of the repertoire. Yeah, it's very, very, very important.